buenas. Welcome, welcome. We are so excited for our roundtable to get started. Estamos súper emocionados de que nuestra mesa redonda empiece. Como siempre, vamos a empezar con un breve anuncio sobre la interpretación. Like always, we're going to start with a brief announcement around interpretation. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Judy to take it away. Así que se lo voy a pasar a Judith para que nos presenta a la interpretación.
Hi everyone, I'm going to be interpreting this afternoon. And so in order to access interpretation, on the bottom of your screen, you should see a globe. You can click on that and then choose the language in which you'd like to listen. This session will be bilingual, so make sure to choose your channel. Buenas tardes, yo seré la intérprete para hoy. Para recibir interpretación y tenerlo disponible, por favor, oprimen el globo que está abajo de la pantalla y escojan el idioma que prefieren escuchar y hablar. Muchísimas gracias.
Ay, ¿cuál será el globo? Ay, no le entiendo ni esta cosa.
Okay, ahí debe de haber un globito al fondo. There should be a little globe at the bottom of the screen. And if you can't see it, sometimes you have to click the 3 little dots that show up on your phone. Y si no lo puedes ver, a veces tienes que seleccionar a los 3 puntitos que ves ahí en la esquina para ver más opciones.
Oh, I think interpretation has not started.
Yeah, that's why I was speaking bilingually. Oh. So let me activate the interpretation.
Ya le puse español, pero escuchar en Spanish, idioma, introducción disponible. Ay, Dios mío. Esta cosa. Oh.
I think we're ready to get started. And as long as you have any issues with interpretation, just put something in the chat. But yeah, so everyone, welcome to our Community Roundtable for Texas. We have some really incredible community activists with us. We're waiting on one more, but I'm hoping he will join us shortly. But really, we're here to just have an honest and open, transparent conversation around the state of Latinx LGBTQ health in Texas and what that looks like in terms of accessing healthcare. So I'm going to turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves, share a little bit more about their work, themselves, and their community that they're a part of. So Andy, if you would like to kick us off.
Hey everyone, my name is Andy Escobar. My pronouns are he and they, or Eli, ella. I'm a born and raised Houstonian and proud Texan. My people are from the Rio Grande Valley. Both of my parents and my family are from there, and I consider it my second home. I'm coming at y'all live from Houston, and I have been doing community organizing for about like 8 years now, ever since I was a student, an undergraduate student. And my organizing has always been working with community, so working with students. I have background working with renters in Austin, Texas, who are fighting against slumlords. And now recently I work with young people all across Texas to activate them and educate them on reproductive justice and how to engage in that movement work. And I think that's everything. And I'm really excited to be here to chat some more.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andy. Really excited for you to bring your perspective with us. Also, I forgot to introduce myself. So I am also Joaquin Carcaño. I work for the Latino Commission on AIDS. I'm the Director of Community Organizing for the Latinos in the South program. I'm based in Durham, North Carolina, but I'm also from the Rio Grande Valley. Share some roots with Andy. So got a lot of Texas love. And I'll turn it over to Mayra.
Hey everyone, I am Myra. I'm from Dallas, so just repping Texas all day. My personal experience has me being kicked out of my family home at 17 after coming out. And that today leads me to work in the community as an advocate for youth experiencing homelessness. I find myself as a community advocate standing in a very, very wide gap between what would be HUD, the education systems, the healthcare systems,
Me dice
and
él por
just,
mensaje, únete, me dice, me mandó un texto en Messenger.
oh, I'm sorry. And sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Standing in this gap, I get to see a lot of different things that still are relevant today as they were in my experience, which was over 10 years ago. And it boggles my mind. I took on the reinstatement of a lapsed juvenile curfew last year within the city of Dallas in order to protect youth. City of Dallas currently doesn't have any overnight safe spaces for young people, but instead we have a criminal curfew ordinance which was citing youth at that time with 70% of the citations being Latinx youth and 18% being Black youth. So obviously an overrepresentation of youth of color in criminal curfew citations. So that's just a little bit of my work.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Maida. I think our personal experience also often informs our work and keeps us so invested. So thank you for sharing. And now we'll continue with Bridget. Would you like to share a little bit about yourself and your work?
Sí, buenas tardes. Sí, sí me escuchan, ¿verdad?
Sí.
Oh, ok. Buenas tardes, yo soy trans, latina. Yo fui voluntaria más de un año con Organización Trans Latina de Texas, que es OLTT, Casa San Andrea. Yo también soy abiertamente HIV positiva. Yo vivo en Houston y hago voluntaria para hacer elegibilidad, para acompañamiento de migración. Eso es lo que hice en el transcurso del tiempo que estuve con OLTT, pero de vez en cuando sigo yendo a Casa San Andrea. No me alejo de mi comunidad y de mi identidad, como me identifico como una mujer transgénero. Y pues es bonito ayudar a la misma comunidad, tanto como toda la comunidad, muchas identidades que es de todo se acepta en Casa San Andrea. Yo fui House Manager un tiempo y fue muy bonito y bello, la verdad. Casa San Andrea es un refugio para chicas trans y que sean HIV positiva, tiene más acceso a la casa, a gays, lesbianas, chico trans, género no binario y queer. Es aceptable todo lo que es la comunidad LGBTQ. Y pues me siento halagada de estar aquí en esta reunión y espero que sea un bien y abrir más espacio para la gente que tiene más estudio. Yo nunca tuve estudio, pero hice el esfuerzo en ayudar a mi comunidad, tanto como mujer trans, tanto eh, hacer el acompañamiento más a las chicas que salen de las detenciones con bufete de abogados, raíces, toda esa cosa, pues es muy bello para ayudar a más que son latinas, vienen de Centroamérica, hondureñas, salvadoreñas, Nicaragua, de todo el país, Guatemala, México también, y no se hace ninguna discriminación de países. Y eso es mi experiencia que tuve con OLTT. Y hoy en fecha también ya voy a empezar a como que organizarme un poquito más con OLTT, voy a integrarme como para hacer limpias, porque hago limpias a veces, y ya creo que empieza a partir de noviembre. De hecho ya me hizo que sí asistiera, pero no le he dicho ni sí ni no todavía, pero probablemente sí, porque voy a ayudar a mí comunidad. Y me gusta hacer lo que me llama la atención tanto. Y pues el tema del HIV, yo estoy abiertamente siempre en todas las reuniones donde he compartido con Ana Andrea, que es OLTT. Yo me gusta hablar el tema del HIV, cómo platicar a la familia. Es algo feo. Bueno, en México para mí fue fatal. Me quisieron matar cuando supieron que era yo eh, HIV positiva. Y tuve miedo, por eso entré aquí, pero aquí en especial experimentar más, me abrí más y bueno, ya sabía un poco más del tema. Yo nunca tuve miedo que cuando me dijeron que era yo HIV positiva, yo dije, bueno, me tocó, hay que enfrentar la vida, no me cuidé y aquí estoy y sigo adelante dando batallas hacia adelante, no para atrás. Eso es todo. Y hay mucha gente que la gente de aquí, que son nacidos de aquí en todo el estado, se entran en la depresión, la depresión, o agarran drogas, o fuman marihuana, o se meten cristal. Yo conozco muchos y yo siempre les hago la plática. Mírame, no porque yo me voy a meter tantas cosas para olvidarme. Al contrario, les digo, más se acuerdan de lo que tienen de cuando se meten eso, cuando ya más o menos ya se le vuelve a pasar otra vez, vuelven a otra vez, les digo, no, no es sano, al contrario, uno se lastima. Eso es todo de mi parte mía.
Thank you so much, Bridget. You all have just shared a lot about yourselves. I think part of this is testimony. So I'm grateful for y'all to sit here and trust us with your lives and your work and what has informed you and your experiences. So I just want to say thank you. Just to kind of ground us.
De nada.
Just to kind of ground us in this space, we have people watching on Facebook, we have people watching who are not from Texas, and I'm wondering, what comes to mind when you say, what is the experience of being Latinx and LGBTQ in Texas like, and what is that relationship to health and well-being? If anyone feels called to answer that first, the floor is yours. Andy, I'm gonna pick on you.
Okay, great. I was gonna be like, go, Maida, go. So immediately what comes to my mind is the sort of duality of right to carry both of those identities, to be both Latinx and to be, queer, trans, or both. There's two cultures at play that are dominant forces, I feel like, in Texas. One of them is just like we're inherently like systemically more conservative, Republican sort of dominated state and culture. And then in addition to that, there's the sort of somewhat, I would argue it's not inherent, right? But there's queerphobia and transphobia in some of our families and our communities. And sort of these sort of like two opposing forces that are still really harmful for us. And so growing up with that and both of those sort of like cultural forces makes it harder to, at least for me, it made it harder for me to both come to terms with my truth. And then the second part was like start living my truth in a healthy way. And what did that look like and what did that engage with? One thing I will never forget, and I just really want to share it, is in 7th grade when I was doing my sex ed in public school here in Houston, up in the burbs over in Cyprus, my 7th grade science teacher, I remember, I'll never forget, she said that all anal sex resulted in HIV transmission. And obviously we know that's completely factually incorrect, 100% wrong. But as a 7th grader, that really stuck with me. And that was sort of, I remember we had this little anonymous box where you could ask questions. And I asked a question of like, okay, so if people get HIV when they have anal sex, why are they doing this? And the teacher read it out loud and said, because that's the only way they can express their love for each other. And she just kind of like closed it off. And it was just like this really jolly answer to such a dark thing. And that, right, that was systemic, right? And that was in public education. So that was sort of my introduction to queerness in the public sphere. So a lot of just like challenges as far as culture goes. And I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Andy. Maida, would you like to comment?
Yeah, being Latinx and living in Texas to me just means fun times. It's a blending of all sorts of fun cultures, but at least for me, it's been hard to find a niche. I know that for me, the first exposure to Latinx community and what would be Latinx queer folks that were actually out and proud and celebrating their culture was actually in the Valley just a couple of years ago at Aquí Estamos. That was the first time that I ever got to see queer people who actually spoke language and could make the wordplay jokes that you can only make in Spanish. And it sounds like it's just a small thing, but it's parts of culture that you end up missing when you end up being only seen for one part of your identity or not being seen as a whole. It also, for me as an advocate, means that I'm fighting on multiple sides. I am often the only person in the room who has any knowledge or experience with undocumented people, which obviously impacts the Latinx community. But I'm also oftentimes the only person with lived experience as a queer person. So, fun times.
Yes, very true. It fulfills the whole spectrum of experiences sometimes, right? Bridget, would you like to share?
La verdad, Houston, la cultura, los latinos, Latinx, es muy complicado, siempre traen lo que es el machismo de un hombre y de una mujer cisgénero y de un hombre cisgénero ven a una trans, hacen mucha discriminación y eso me halaga para estar apoyando a mi comunidad trans, a orientar, porque hay más jóvenes que vienen en camino, que son nacidos aquí y más o menos aquí ya hay más avance para más educación de género y pues la cultura de los latinos es complicado, lo machismo de la gente y eso es costoso para cambiar para ellos y tratan de disimular, pero siempre va a haber cizaña de Latinx. Pero yo me siento orgullosa de compartir y de ayudar en Texas, en Houston. Me encanta hacer voluntario con más chicas que llegan de Centroamérica. Ellas a veces se sienten incómodas como decirle su pronombre y ven a la gente latina, dice, lo que van a decir, deja que digan misa y punto. Yo siempre es mi punto de vista y no te van a quitar nada y pues, tienen que entender si eres una chica trans. Y siempre eso, pero por eso estoy orgullosamente de ser indígena, sin ningún estudio, como siempre lo he dicho, pero me gusta más ayudar a mi comunidad. Y también a toda la comunidad LGBTQA, hay muchos comparto mi plática a veces y me encanta eso y me gusta estar en Houston. Y no, de ahí no me muevo. Eso es todo.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you. You know, I hear this hint of excitement in some of your all's voices. There is pride in this work. There's a deep, deep love for community and for the people. And it sounds like you all have found your places in a way, or something that calls to you. Often in these spaces, there's a lot of, like of the venting of the, just like everything is bad, everything is terrible, but you all also spoke of some, movement. So I'd like to open up the space and think about, what have been some wins, what feels promising or exciting to you in the fields you're a part of. Andy, you work in reproductive sexual health, gender equity. Mayra, you work with youth and a lot of housing insecurity, and Bridget when it comes to HIV and also for the trans community. So what does success look like for you to you, or what has felt like a big win for you?
I want to say, for me, the thing that comes to my mind immediately is my work right now in mentoring young people. I can say overwhelmingly the vast majority of the people throughout Texas that I'm working with are queer and trans and non-binary Latinx folks, and seeing them embrace their identities, their intersections, so unapologetically and so powerfully, has just given me so much pride in knowing that like the sort of like suffering and struggle that myself and others have gone through is something that's being minimized, and is something that, we'll be able to see as something of the past. Because I'm seeing so many young people embracing themselves and being so unapologetic. And being also super proud of being Latinx, but then also being really radical about it and really interrogating what Latinx means, right? We're talking about so many intricacies that it is, and really we got a name that it's colonization. And so young people right now, young queer and trans and non-binary Latinx people in Texas are really holding it down and really doing some incredible work. And I'm really excited for when we start taking over and we start taking things into our hands, because there's so much change that is coming, and it's with our young people. And I know that sounds cheesy, but it's so true.
Yes. Mayra, would you like to share?
Yeah, I don't think we've had any big wins. We've had just some small wins, which, in 2020, we will take all the wins. This is the first year I serve now as the co-chair of the Metro Dallas Youth Committee, which is actually a committee of youth organizations and agencies serving youth experiencing homelessness. And all the projects that we had at the beginning of the year got washed away in the pandemic. And we've kind of regrouped, but we were successful in coming together and putting together like I guess you can call it a campaign, lobbying for the creation of new positions to serve as liaisons for youth experiencing homelessness at the rec centers. We ultimately lost in the ultimate budget decision, but I consider it a win to get so many organizations and individuals to actually commit to the cause and actually put together something going forward, especially with all the division and what I call in Dallas just gang wars, nonprofits fighting over the same funding sources and oftentimes the same donors, creates for just a messy playing field. And to have everybody actually agree on this is something that is needed and could be served by the city, which is a neutral party, is a win.
Definitely. And small wins are a win. We'll take it, like you said. Bridget?
Ya, como dice, la verdad sí, OLTT está haciendo un buen trabajo en el aspecto de la comunidad. Con el pandemia del COVID-19 ha estado ayudando a mucha gente trans que también que son trabajadoras sexual. eh, que, que a veces por la situación del trabajo, que no hay mucho ahorita, ah, ha, re- ha tenido mucho fondo ULTT y ha estado apoyando a la comunidad trans, a, sin lucros de lo que es la comunidad LGBTQA, y, y están dando comidas también cada 2 semanas. Y la verdad, pues es algo bueno porque están haciendo un trabajo bueno. Y OLTT también hace cambio de nombres, el marcador de género para las mujeres trans. Y es un halago porque hay muchas eh, que son de la comunidad LGTB que ya tienen años que no han avanzado mucho, pero OLTT está haciendo un buen trabajo y me gusta siempre ser voluntaria de vez en cuando ahorita que ya no estoy en casa, Ana Andrea, yo voy, asisto de vez en cuando, pero no me alejo mucho porque me gusta ser voluntario, aunque no hay ni un pago, porque la verdad eso fue, y me gusta hacer porque es ayudar, apoyar, empujar a la demás gente que van llegando, vayan conociendo y que vayan haciendo, vayan a terapias también, porque también están dando terapias allí en casa de Ana Andrea. Y hay muchos proyectos ahorita con LTT y ya la gente ya conocen cómo llegar y se organiza más y más, y eso es bonito ah, porque están ayudando a la comunidad y siempre poco a poco, pero ya van avanzando y es lo más bonito de todo esto. Es todo.
Beautiful. Yes, I think OLTT does incredible work, providing safety in so many ways. You know, name changes to little housing, to food, you know, affirming just spaces, right? And I think all of y'all are providing that in your work and in yourselves. And y'all have all mentioned, you know, like COVID in some way of, you know, having to just completely shift all of your work. I think we all, you know, have been kind of blindsided by COVID, of course, and really thinking about what comes next, or all of our plans have had to change. So really thinking about, you know, the way COVID has impacted us and our health, our mental and physical health. What does that look like for you all, for your communities and the work you're doing?
I'll jump in. For us, it meant canceling our annual youth count, which is a survey event where we actually find out how many young people we can find in the streets. It's only been done in the city of Dallas for this would have been the 3rd year. So for this hiccup to happen in year 3 is pretty big. We still don't know what it's going to look like going forward. But one of the first things that came to mind is we can't risk exposing an already vulnerable population to COVID. And incidentally, like when it first happened, one of the shelters actually had a positive test case with one of their employees. And that shut off a chain reaction within the other shelters to start creating the policies for what do you do in response, how long are you going to shut down, and how do you actually keep youth safe. And luckily we didn't have any transmissions, but it was enough of a wake-up call to get people to focus. And it's only been as of this week that some of those drop-in centers that are open during the day are going back into operation. So it's taken 7 months to kind of get back to where we are. But one of the other things that it's brought up is how intersectional all these different causes really are. One of the major things was, how do you keep young people connected? And for a lot of service providers, they lost contact with the youth with the pandemic. Cell phone services and internet's hard to come by. And then when places are closed, you don't even have public access to Wi-Fi. So we were able to bring awareness to that cause, and we actually were able to affect some sort of change with local cities nearby starting to have Wi-Fi again at their public libraries, and the city of Dallas expanding it to their rec centers to make it accessible for families. So it's little things like that that we know will be impactful even when the pandemic goes away. Young people need a way to still be connected. They need their support system, whether it be adults, whether it be peers. They need a way to be able to have those opportunities to better themselves, whether it be through education or through employment. Technology and internet connection is a necessity in these days. So for us, it's shown how we need to start connecting more and more to be able to fill in all the needs that young people end up having.
Definitely communication, right? Like the physical piece of communication. How do you keep in touch? How do you allow yourself to be accessible to your community if there's no way to get in contact?
Mhm.
Andy, you looked ready.
Yeah. So I'm really happy to say that I'm part of this organization called Impulse Group, and we have a chapter here in Houston, and I'm on the board, and I'm one of the co-directors of community engagement. And one of the really cool things that Impulse Houston did recently was they actually offered counseling and therapy scholarships for people, but particularly Black and Latinx LGBTQ folks, and it provided 4 sessions paid for with a therapist, but they also partnered with therapists in the community who offered themselves up. So, so people who received the scholarship could go and find a therapist and sort of like find the person that best fit their needs. And it was somebody who's like wanting to work with these folks and this, you know, our population or whatever. And so really just highlighting the need, especially right now more than ever, to take care of our mental health. I know I can speak for my experience. I have had a really hard time, and therapy has been really crucial for me to make sense of how to navigate this madness that we're all dealing with. And I think it was a really good model for how other organizations can offer just like a direct service to people that is so critical and so in need right now. Like we as, you know, multiply marginalized people, as queer and trans and non-binary Latinx folks, like we have a lot of stuff to talk about, and we need to see somebody who can understand our lived experiences. So I just really want to highlight the importance of mental health and finding ways to make that a super easy thing for our people, because we really need it right now.
Thank you, Andy. Definitely mental health, you know, hits us in all kinds of ways, and it's very difficult to access. And now we have multiple sources of trauma, you know, happening around us. So what kind of systems can we build? Bridget, would you like to talk about how, you know, COVID and the environment has affected the trans community specifically?
La verdad sí es algo difícil para la comunidad trans, más como hace rato platiqué, las que son trabajadoras sexuales, pero OLTT siempre ha estado apoyando económicamente con la renta y con terapias también, porque muchas de ellas se bloquean para cómo lo van a hacer, que ya no hay aquí, dónde van a agarrar, pero como siempre lo bueno que la directora Ana Andrea Molina siempre pone posts en su Facebook y qué día va a ser esto, qué día va a ser. De hecho, también están dando para, tienen un maquillista para dar como aprender a maquillarse, están dando clase de maquillaje también, y eso es como para que se distraigan las que están un poco, se deprimen por lo del COVID, la verdad, mucha gente se le bajó la autoestima, se le hace muy difícil, pero se han enfocado en ir más a OLTT ahorita, que tiene más como más gente, y eso es una alegría para la comunidad también LGBTQA, un apoyo, y cualquier cosa creo que también han estado pagando también biles de teléfono, y eso es ya también como que ya la gente, y sí están dando también terapias y toda esa cosa. La verdad, muchas, siempre me preguntan como yo fui un buen tiempo, allí colaboré más de un año, y me dicen, oye, Bridget, ¿qué es? Yo le digo, asistan, vayan. Y ahí no se les cierran la puerta a nadie. Lleguen, ah, siempre va a haber un vaso de agua o una botita de agua o un refresco. Es cosa para eso está el albergue, el refugio. Y sí es una alegría porque ayuda mucho a la comunidad OLTT, y la terapia de salud mental también es lo más primordial también para que vayan también a las terapias. Eso es todo.
Yes, I can definitely say there was a time when me, Jose, and Andy were in Houston, and Jose, texted Anandre and was like, we're in the area, can we visit? And Anandre was like, come. And, they had drinks for us, they had food, they gave us a tour. I mean, it was like a family. We sat on the couches, got to meet the dogs, and, you can just feel that energy of welcoming in that space. Very, very special space to be in, definitely. So you've talked about mental health care, talked about, access to health. What is the relationship for the communities you're part of or that you're working in to health, healthcare in general? We have a lot of providers that are on the call or who are listening in. What would you want them to know, or what has been, what is the relationship for your community to the medical provider, the medical institution as a whole?
For my community, it's one that's very, very complex. As I mentioned before, I stand in a very, very large gap that, as far as I can determine, was created by definitions and the different terms that the different funding agencies use. So when we're talking specifically for youth experiencing homelessness, we have the definitions of homeless as set by HUD, set by the McKinney-Vento Act, which dictates education. And then we have the Runaway Youth Act, which is actually set by the health services. So not only is it a definition of homeless, you also have different definitions of youth, with some of them going up to 18, some of them going up to 21, and some of them going to 24 and 25. Things get complicated really, really quickly. The other parts of it is because in Texas, we are a little bit more nuanced, you could say, because we have the age of majority, which is at age 17, which makes you civilly and criminally liable for your own actions. But you're still unable to access healthcare without parental consent. So it's not something very, very easy to explain or to be able to even process with, unless you're actually knee deep into your own community's resources to find out who's doing what. I know that for me, at the beginning of this year, pre-pandemic, I was privy to a case of a young person who identifies as trans, who was already at this point within CPS, and his foster family actually physically assaulted him. And beyond that physical assault, it was a school counselor that became aware. So the school counselor ends up contacting and reaching out to different organizations, trying to find out where this young person can, first of all, be housed. And in Dallas, we only have a handful of shelters with less than a handful beds each that actually serves LGBTQ youth. When it comes to minors, that number is, I think, 2. 2 shelters in the whole city of Dallas, which is ludicrous when you think of the DISD district, which is Dallas Independent School District, reporting 4,000 students experiencing homelessness. We don't have the breakdowns by racial demographics for what those numbers look like. But based on everything else that I know about systemic racism, I'm going to guess that it's people of color. And that's something that we need to deal with and be able to address. And healthcare ends up being fundamental. I know for City of Dallas, we recently had a community health needs assessment, and it found that the majority of the city is living in poverty and thus likely to have adverse health effects. If we know that adverse health effects end up causing trauma in youth and end up causing later health disparities and health issues, like why can't we address that now? Dallas has the proud title of being number 3 in the highest ranking cities for childhood poverty. It's something that we need to address, and it needs to be done now. But at this point, I'm still stuck on definitions and words and trying to get everybody to work together.
Yes, thank you for naming that. I think a lot of the times there's good intentions and good ideas, and you can't move it past that first couple stages because you're stuck by red tape, right? So yeah, I think that's something that we really also need to take into consideration when doing this work, is how trapped you are by the systems that are currently in place. Andy, did you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. There's 2 points I want to make, and I think the first one is the strongest for right now in this moment is, I think right now for healthcare providers, it is so crucial to approach patients with extra sort of grace, because I find, especially now in the pandemic, we're really developing a strong culture of shame, and trying to guilt people and shame them into doing things differently. And just as we know, I can't speak at any moment in my life where shame got me to do something that was better for me, right? If anything, it's harmful, right? And so especially in a healthcare setting, the best healthcare I've ever received is from an amazing organization called the Kind Clinic. They're based out of Austin, and their approach to care is just so people-centered, and it's just so non-judgmental, right? It's like, you're here to get the help that you need, and we're here to meet those needs. We're not here to tell you how to live your life, unless that's something that you want, that you desire, right? It's nothing imposed. And so I think there's something really powerful to approaching healthcare without shame and stigma, and really trying to find people and meet them where they're at. Because in this pandemic too, and I speak specifically for our queer and trans community, for those of us who are really lonely, hookup culture was a way for us to lessen that loneliness and to find community and culture. And now that's all thrown into whack because of this pandemic. But you better believe people are still out there meeting people that they don't normally hang out with or know. So there's risks that are happening. But instead of shaming people for doing that, I think we need to really find ways to meet the needs that people are having, and think about community care. What are community resources, instead of imposing things on the self? Because right now it's so hard to do things as an individual. And so then the second point, right? So the first point, no shame, no stigma. The second point is cultural competency. There is such value in meeting a healthcare provider who already, you don't have to educate them. You don't have to bring their hand and bring them over here as far as like what your identity is, what your sexual experiences are, what your cultural identity is, right? And we also have to remember that Latinx is so broad, and it lumps up so many different experiences and communities. And we have to know that there's nuance between being Central American and being from Mexico, or being from South America, or being from from the Caribbean, right? And recognizing the nuances in Latinx of like, there's white Latinx folks, they're all around, and that's real. Just as there's Afro Latinx and Black Latinx folks, and just knowing the complexity of our imposed identity, let's be real, is really important for healthcare providers, because just seeing the word Hispanic or Latino or Latinx or whatever doesn't really give you a big idea of that person's story or history, because it is so broad. So I just really invite folks to do some work on researching what it means to be a queer and non-binary and trans person right now, and what it means to be a Latinx person right now.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Andy. There was a couple things in the chat I just wanted to share. Someone, Eduardo Ocampo, put in the chat for y'all that they're in Houston and would love to network. They're patient navigator at Texas Children's Hospital and do receive patients that identify as trans. Would love to know more resources. So they left their email in the chat. So please feel free to share, to network. We really want to cultivate that space as well. Is one reason we want to showcase work from across the state. And that Susie said that as an LGBTQ plus Latina, that she wants to be a trusted resource for the community. So y'all are those models as well. Bridget, did you want to share a little bit about what trying to access, gender affirming care for the trans community looks like for yourself in the community?
Mira, pues a la organización, la directora Ana Andrea Molina tocó muchas puertas para acceder al Legacy para la comunidad trans, y esa clínica es para la comunidad LGBTQA, y con respeto te llaman, tienes que, como tu pronombre, cómo te identificas, o tu identidad, y ya van y ya al primer paso, cuando te registras, ya dejas tu pronombre, tu identidad, ya cuando la segunda ya te dicen tu apellido. Es lo más importante, que poco a poco Houston se está abriendo un poquito más en lo que es la comunidad trans, lo de la identidad y todo. Y Legacy a OLTT le está dando para hormonas. Yo, de hecho, yo estoy allí. Yo ahí agarro hormonas, y Montrose Center también estoy en terapias también de salud mental. Aparte llego en OLTT, también hago terapia de salud mental. Y lo que es del HIV, del medicamento, también es de Legacy, todo allí es de Legacy. Y creo que la clínica San Tomás también dan medicamento para también del HIV. Hormonas, sí, no creo que están dando, no estoy tan enterada bien allí. La que ve todo es ese proyecto del, de los medicamentos para a la comunidad trans, es Ana Andrea, es quien me asigna para en cuál clínica, cuando estuve ahí viviendo, y de repente hago voluntaria, pero la gente que ya tiene su elegibilidad ahí, yo les hago acompañamiento y no tengo ningún problema mientras que esté yo libre en mi tiempo, y con gusto yo las llevo como dije hace rato, a todo donde pueda me dan acceso, que ya me conocen. Y eso es muy importante también. La gente latina siempre es algo, la cultura siempre lo trae, y para que te digan, no te van a decir tu pronombre, te van a decir tu nombre real. Para la gente latina es algo costoso, que les cuesta como para decidir, pero todo poco a poco la gente ya se van adaptando, y pues la verdad es bonito, y como OLTT está dando mucho servicio ahorita y ha abierto muchas puertas y de hecho ha tocado muchas puertas para que se subiera un poco más. Y eso me halaga para que las demás personas, la juventud que viene en camino más todavía. Bueno, yo a mi edad ya voy saliendo, pero es bueno abrir más espacio, conociendo más. Eso es lo más importante. En Houston, un poquito más, se está abriendo más la comunidad. Eso es todo.
Definitely. And I think, you spoke to, sometimes the systems aren't prepared for us, or prepared to provide the spaces that we need. And we have advocates like Andrea and other community folks who are providing those services or who are, leading the change little by little. Elias Cantu is joining us from the Rio Grande Valley. So if you would like to share a little bit about yourself and your work, love to hear. And then one of the questions we just asked was, just the relationship of the healthcare institution or the healthcare system to the community that you're serving or that you're a part of. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Elias Cantu, and I am originally from the Valley, from South Texas. And I started working in HIV care programs back in 99, 2000 actually. And here with Valley AIDS Council as a case manager. Here in the Rio Grande Valley. And I started off as a case manager and then went on to be the project coordinator for a SPINS project. It was a border health initiative, and it was border health. We were one of the sites along the U.S.-Mexico border from here in the Valley, all the way up to New Mexico, Arizona, California, all the way up to Tijuana and San Diego. And it was a national project. We did get to present at several conferences throughout the country. And in one of those conferences, it's like they say, always do your best because you never know who's watching. We actually were at a presentation in San Francisco. I believe it was the United States Conference on AIDS. And some staff from HRSA was there. And they were there for our presentation about the issues that affect the border and accessing care and treatment. And I was actually invited to present for World AIDS Day back in 2004 in Washington, D.C. For HRSA. And it was a 5-year grant. So after 5 years, the funding was only for that period. So I ended up building a large network because of the program and because of VAC, and to where when the program ended, I did move to Dallas with some contacts that I had over there, and I went to go work for AIDS Arms as a case manager. And then I also went on to work with UT Southwestern on a national study that they were doing, which is actually a project that I had participated in when it was like in its pilot phase. There was no funding or anything like that when it was in a pilot stage, but I did get to participate in that, and it was the medical monitoring project with the health department in Austin. So I did work with them with UT Southwestern for 10 years. And what brought me back to the Valley was my mother. She slipped and fell at the house and needed some knee surgery, shoulder surgery, and her wrist and all that. So that brought me back to the Valley, and it brought me also back to Valley AIDS Council. I did start as a case manager for the HEI program, which is our substance abuse and mental health program. As we know, in the world of nonprofits, it's all about funding. So once that project ended, I started a new position as of last week as community liaison. So I pretty much hit the ground running with that. which we recently opened a drop-in center for our LGBTQIA plus youth in the Valley. And that is known as Casa Orgullo. And that one opened last week, this past weekend on October 11th. So we did work on a Sunday, and that was on purpose. It was to open on the same day as National Coming Out Day. My role in that was, as community liaison, was to contact the media. And we were able to get that on local English and Spanish media, Univision and CBS, and pretty much all the stations, the McAllen Monitor, Valley Morning Star, pretty much all the local media was able to log on. It was something that we did virtually. Now, because of COVID, we do everything just the way we are doing it now, through video and through Zoom. The reporters were able to do that, online, virtually, and participate, and still be able to give us, the coverage, for our youth here in the Valley. I am also, today I visited with the university to talk about programs and continuing our relationship for HIV testing, HIV prevention, PrEP, and also talked about our Casa Orgullo. That was this morning. The whole COVID and all that has really changed in the way we, are able to meet. I did meet with one of the doctors there, a PA that was there, and he was in all his gear and, the mask and the shield and the gown and all that. And we were standing like feet apart. But that didn't stop us from still, disseminating the information and delivering the boxes, the brochures, and everything that was needed. But I am now part of the education team here at VAC, and we are getting ready to start our PrEP campaign and transgender campaign. It's getting very, very busy around here, what I can say.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. I think, I saw the opening of Casa Orgullo, and that's so exciting for the Valley. It being such a big region that has never had an LGBTQ center or space, and here is this, blossoming space for youth coming out. So that's huge. Thank you. We're towards the end of our session, but I have a question for you all to kind of close out. What is, and I kind of stole this from Jose, but what is a wish you have for this work, and how do you see the community contributing to this work, or to this wish?
I can go first. Being that we just opened Casa Orgullo and it being a drop-in center for youth, we did see a lot of support from local representatives, judges, and state representatives, and so they were able to use their platform also to really show us their support. But when I lived in Dallas for the 10 years that I was there, I did participate in also youth centers as well over there. I believe it was Youth Texas or Youth First. And I'm also the president of LULAC RGV Rainbow Council. So when I was in Dallas, we opened our first LGBT Rainbow Council for LULAC. It's a national civil rights organization, one of the oldest organizations for Latinos. And we would chaperone those youth centers so that they could have their Valentine's Day dance, so that they could have prom. It made me remember about me going to my high school prom when I really wanted to go with, my then boyfriend. So my boyfriend and I, we both went to prom, but we went with, our dates just for picture purposes. But I really think that speaks very loudly about how over the years and the decades that have, how so many things have changed. And when I saw that, and we were able to chaperone these Valentine's Day dances and the prom. That was something that I, just kind of sat back and looked at and, probably shed a tear like, oh my God, I wish we had this when it was back in my day. But that's now that we opened Casa Orgullo here in the Valley, that's something that I would like to see also here for our youth in our community. That's my wish. And also before I moved to the Valley, back to the Valley, I was also partnering with, I believe it's Promise House. Promise House had partnered with the city of Dallas for housing. They opened up a shelter for our LGBT youth in Dallas. And so that's something else that I would like to address as well for our youth here in the Valley as well, is a homeless shelter for our youth.
Yes, I think there's some other youth advocates on this panel, so I can see some connections being made. Mayra, would you like to share? What is your wish for this work, and how can the community contribute to that wish?
So first off, I want to say hi, Elias. I haven't seen you since you left Dallas, but fancy seeing Elias here. I actually got to meet, and I think one of the most impactful things that I remember with Elias is hanging out outside of a Teen Pride event when I first started getting involved with youth back in 2015. And the protesters that went all the way from Oklahoma to Dallas to protest our little Teen Pride event, and how that event was something that's not been since that year, that I really would like to see come back to Dallas. And it was a Teen Pride made for those under the age of 21. And it was a family-friendly event, which basically means no nudity. But we had a bounce house. We had a resource fair. We had HRC out there, ACLU, the Rainbow LULAC folks. We had HIV testing. We had a vendor who canceled on us for food. So we had a giant table of like Jack in the Box food freely available to youth, because you never know if young people are actually eating or whether or not they're homeless and just floating about. So I definitely want to see more of that. I'm also really cognizant that I exist because of the work of people like Elias. So I'm going to share this with y'all back here. But this is actually the picture of me and my wife, now wife, at her prom. We actually went together. And for the Rainbow LULAC Council, that's my my little sign right there that hangs. So definitely this work just keeps building and building. And I'd like to see a day where we don't have an answer. Well, let me see. How do I word this? Because this is intention and manifestation, right? I would like to see a day that if somebody needs something, there is a resource readily available to them always. And that folks don't have to go without just because of language, accepting, and labels, ultimately.
Beautiful. I had no idea y'all knew each other, so I love that, that little reunion happened virtually. That works building, intergenerational work is really important as well. Bridget, would you like to share? What is your wish for the work you're involved in, and how can the community support you in that work?
So, bueno, yo siempre he tenido el apoyo, yo siempre he sido bendecida. Como te dije, Olete ha hecho un buen trabajo en el transcurso que desde que llegué a este año empezó un poco más, y quiero que siga avanzando más la organización y que siga ayudando a la comunidad trans específicamente, y a la comunidad LGBTQA, porque la casa para eso está, y ha estado ayudando con recursos, y que siga más adelante. Ese es mi halago para seguir yo también asistiendo, porque a veces yo voy tienen un grupo de pláticas por el tema del HIV, y a veces comparto con la gente nueva que llegan, doy mi testimonio de lo que yo viví, Y eso me gusta más y me agrada más apoyar más a la comunidad, que a veces, te digo, a veces no saben cómo manifestar diciéndole a la familia. Es algo complicado para la gente que van llegando también y a la gente que son de aquí y que son jóvenes. Y aparte de eso, y yo le doy mi respeto, tanto como otras organizaciones que hay en Houston, pero OLTT siempre no me ha dejado en el abandono, siempre he tenido la mano de Ana Andrea y no me quejo y que siga más adelante y que prospere más la organización y voy a seguir siendo voluntaria cuando yo pueda. Es todo.
Beautiful, thank you. And hopefully the community can help make Casa Ana Andrea, you know, long-term and continue to expand, right? Andy, would you like to close this out?
Yeah, for me, the one wish that I have is more solidarity with other folks, right? Like recognizing that, right, we have to organize our Latinx communities, but we also have to build our power with everyone else that we are struggling with, right? So like our Black siblings and our Asian American siblings and our Native and Indigenous siblings, like just like everyone working in solidarity to really dismantle these harmful systems that we're dealing with. And just remember like the strength and power. And the way to do that is we have to learn each other's struggles. And sometimes that's hard to do because our histories and our struggles have been suppressed and erased. Or they're harder to access. You have to take some fancy college course for it or something, or read some like 500-page book that you don't understand. But there are resources out there to learn what our you know, siblings are dealing with, what they're struggling with, what we can do to show up in a way that makes sense. So really just wanting to push more solidarity, showing up for each other more so, because that's how we're gonna just get rid of all this mess.
Thank you, Andy. And yes, it's true. You know, we can feel very, very isolated during this time, and we have to lean into each other and continue building these systems of trust within our community and learn each other's struggles, like you said. And as challenging as that can be for us, or the things we have to confront in that process, it's vital to move this work forward collectively. So thank you for those words.
This is Elias. I was going to say, I heard Bridget talk about Andrea Molina, and we also got to work with her with LULAC in Dallas, and she was also really expanding her network as well in the Dallas area. So I did get to meet her, and I believe they were able to create a group and also do like elections for like president and secretary and all that for those positions. So Bridget, si le manda mis saludos de parte de Elías, Andrea, aquí estamos para ayudarla. And I know that I also would refer clients or, you know, anyone that needed housing in Houston, being that I was in Dallas, but I knew of her in Houston. So people would reach out to me. So she was a great resource for me to be able to refer someone to her in Houston as well. And just was gonna add about the work that we did also with LULAC, and Andrea was there for that meeting also with the city councilman, Omar Narvaez. He's the one that would open his office to us to have the meetings. That was back when he was with Lambda Legal. So we could meet with our transgender community in Dallas. And we also got to have the first, we had our inaugural event with the Mexican consulate. And the Mexican consulate also really wanted to promote and reach out to the LGBT community. And we had our first World AIDS Day event where we were able to test 65 men and women. And that one is something that, being that I moved to the Valley, for this year, I do want to plan something, especially since we are able to do this virtually, to do a World AIDS Day event to include Mexican consulate in Dallas. We're going to take advantage of the virtual world to do that for the whole state. Being that I'm also the chair of LGBT for LULAC for the entire state, so I'm going to try to do something to include all of South Texas, San Antonio, and Corpus Christi also has a council also, and then including Dallas. So we had a meeting yesterday, so we're still planning on doing something for World AIDS Day. Another work that we do with asylum seekers with Rainbow LULAC is we would go to Matamoros, and just also wanted to mention that there is an LGBT group of asylum seekers in Matamoros that really, I believe they just opened the Rainbow Bridge that really need our help. They were living at the tent camp, and they do need some help with getting into apartments and furnishing the apartments as well. So with that LGBT work that we did with asylum seekers, I also got to meet the city commissioner, Jessica Tetro from Bronzeville, and she worked with us with the asylum seekers, but also Bronzeville was able to create the first LGBT task force here in the Valley, and they really have grown our representation, and using the platform, from the city council and city commissioner and the mayor also for our LGBT community as well.
Thank you for sharing, Elias. I mean, there's been so much growth in the years, so much to build across the state of Texas that y'all are, have been a part of and contributed to. And, we really see so much of a future possible. I think Mayra, before we close, has something to share with us really quickly. But yeah, if you would like to share.
Yeah, I tend to fidget a lot and can't sit still, so I tend to doodle. And I've been doodling this whole time, every time you've seen me looking down. I just wanted to share it with you. But it's just a small little doodle on an index card. I'm gonna drop my my email address in the chat if anybody would like to follow up, anything youth related in Dallas. I'm here.
Yes, please feel free to share your contact information in the chat. And I want to thank our incredible panelists for sharing all that you did with us. It's hard to be so vulnerable sometimes on screen, and to be very, very transparent. And that's what we need to move the work forward. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you all for attending. Thank you to our interpreter, Judith, making this as accessible as possible. And for all those watching on Facebook, and hopefully we can continue to keep in touch and build. And I hope you all have a really, really wonderful weekend and continue to ride this wave of promise and hope that is in our future. So thank you all.